Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is Keesa Shreen. As wealth firms race to build digital experiences for their clients, topics such as personalization, data preferences, and client engagement are front and center. And today we're discussing the latest data and tools firms can use to build digital experiences to engage and retain the modern investor. Joining us to discuss this is Edward Soffer, ESG Manager at Interactive Brokers, and Charles Smith, Head of Digital Solutions at Refinitiv. Thank you so much for joining, both of you.
Hi, great to be here.
Thanks, Keith. Good to be here.
So, Charles, we know that high net worth investors want hyper personalization in their investment experience. How does the use of data help to achieve this?
Well, Keith, there's definitely two ways to do that. One, I think first, wealth firms need to really understand their clients better, right? If you're a high net worth investor, or you have certain preferences, you have certain desires, certain needs, certain goals you want to achieve, it's really a job of the wealth provider, whether it be through an advisor or through a platform, to really understand their clients better, their behaviors, their preferences, monitor what they're doing, their calls, things are coming into your, data you can view from your conversations and interaction with the investor, really understand them better. And then the second part of that really is providing them with the right data that aligns to their values, to their views, to their preferences. So providing them, targeted news stories, news sentiment, news analytics on top of the news to kind of give them a view of what's really going on across the board, rather than having to read every news story, but give them the analysis and the in-depth tools to really use the data better, right? To personalize it to their needs, their preferences, and give them a good view. And then obviously we've seen quite a bit of interest in ESG. A lot of investors today, they've been home during the pandemic. They want to align their investments to their values, right? And give them the ability to see, how companies are run. I think ideally you want to invest in the companies that are best run, that are best led, and using ESG data is a great way to do that.
So, Edward, we're talking about ESG here, and looking at the social aspect of ESG, how does data personalization fit with the new generation of investors? So millennial investors, even Gen Z?
Keesa, it's a very good question. I think it fits very, very nicely. Millennials really care about universal values, and they're making the decisions based on them. But I would take it a step further. It's not just universal values. They're making it personal. So they care about LGBTQ inclusion, gender equality, race diversity. And we all know that there's a massive transfer of wealth happening from the boomers to the millennials. Some estimates go as high as 60 trillion over the next 25 years. So that's pretty massive, and vendors are definitely taking note of that. Data personalization is already happening, and to Charles' point, ESG is becoming such an important factor on it. And millennials are increasingly caring more and more about the S factor. The E is important, but the S is becoming also critical, especially after what we all went through in 2020.
So in terms of, and you're just leading up to it, have recent world events like the pandemic, how they've enhanced the need for customized information, specifically in the sustainability field? Do you see a direct link between sustainability and some of the desires and values of the investor, or is it more of an indirect link?
Yeah, I think he said that the pandemic has definitely influenced sustainability. It's raised it to the next level. I would like to believe, and I feel this personally, that the pandemic has changed the world for the better. I think we all care more about helping one another, helping our planet, and ESG is being discussed so much in almost every single industry. We see that from retail and apparel to industrials to technology. It's everywhere. Regulators are also taking note of it. And we see that happening more in Europe, but I think in the US, given the new administration, we're going to start seeing it become more and more important. So just as we all have unique fingertips, we also have a unique way of looking on how to give back and express our values, how to help our communities. And investors are increasingly looking at solutions that provide them that. So customization is definitely here to stay.
Great. We'd also like to welcome questions from our audience. So feel free to give us questions and chime in via the chat. And Charles, we're going to go with you. What are the data and news analytics preferences you're seeing now in terms of what the investors are looking for, in terms of what they're using the most? What are you seeing here?
Sure. We're seeing, obviously, with everyone paying more attention to their investments, they're spending a lot more time looking at the data. And there's so much data out there, so much information, so much news you can get from a lot of different sources. We're seeing a lot of interest in news sentiment. So looking across news stories to say, what is the trends in terms of the attitude toward news, right? Are there more positive stories being written or negative stories being written? And then incorporating some of that trends around social media, right? Incorporating social media trends as well. So you saw obviously GameStop, AMC all being influenced by chat rooms and Reddit, right? So to be able to look across at all these different sources and determine which way the market's going to move. Firms are looking for more data and ways to use that data and analyze it better, to provide that analytics to their investors. Because as I said before, there's so much data out there. It's very difficult to weed through it all. So what we're trying to do here at Refinitiv is to provide a succinct way to look at the data and get analysis quickly without having to go and read through everything that's out there.
Great. And Edward, going back to you about the ESG data specifically, how is it decision useful for retail investors? We know as it relates to institutional investors, it needs to be decision useful, cost effective, et cetera. But in terms of it being decision useful for the retail investor segment, what can you speak to about that?
Sure. I think ESG data is so prevalent out there, especially now, right? There's so many vendors, there's so many data packages, and there's not one way to define it, to report it, right? So that can add a lot of confusion into the marketplace, but I'll focus on the positive side. I think it's positive for retail investors because it provides them with a richer, fuller picture, right? Because everybody has their different methodologies. So it just makes it a more informed decision by looking at all the different data sources. So the other thing that's happening is that companies are starting to talk more and more about ESG, not just through written reports, but also in earnings call. I was reading an article yesterday which pointed out something that's quite interesting, that the mentions of ESG themes on earnings transcripts has increased dramatically. Just to give you a sense, in 2015, there were practically zero mentions. And in 2021, the mentions are almost 1,200 times. So that's already giving us a sense of how prevalent it is and that it's here to stay. So I think in general, this is all great for retail investors. And ESG provides them the opportunity to look behind the curtain and to see what really is material for a company.
So, and just going back to that, that's an interesting point. So if retail investors are not, looking at the data that comes from the reports that companies put out, but rather they're looking at other sources, can we expect retail investors to primarily listen in on those earnings calls or look at the company's reports directly? Is that their source?
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. I think there's so much material out there. And the earnings calls, sometimes it's not interesting for retail investors to dial in, but because the transcripts are out there and because it's residing on the web, they can do searches quickly through Google and others, and this will pop up, and they'll be able to be better informed that way.
Great. And also would love to hear, there's so many choices. We talk about all the choices here about the data out there, so much data. How can high net worth investors make sense of everything that they're seeing from what we're just talking about, doing the Google research, listening to the earnings calls? How can they make sense of this?
Yeah, and Keesa, that's a great question. I think that's a challenge not only for high net worth investors, but also for every retail investor. As you mentioned, there's so much, like where do I even start from? So what I would say, and this keeps with the theme of the webinar, is that first investors need to understand or sort of do a little bit of soul searching. What do they care about the most? What are their personal values? What are the things they should be zooming in? That's going to help to narrow down the number of providers out there, or sort of like they're creating their own customized and personalized data sources, right? After that, they should conduct due diligence on those providers and see which ones resonate the most to them. And frankly, at the end of the day, see which ones they trust the most.
Great.
Yeah, just to add to that a little bit, I think one thing that we provide here at Refinitiv is our workspace platform. So, you don't need to always sort through the data on your own, right? A lot of firms have advisors, whether it be full service or a call center advisor, using platforms that can help you sift through the data, right? And our workspace platform allows you to combine our market data, our content, our news, and create a centralized, personalized view based on the client. So we have a client data layer that we provide as part of the platform that allows you to pull all data sources together and present to the advisor a consolidated view of the client and help that advisor communicate trends, ideas, thoughts to that client. So really, you could do it yourself. There's definitely tools to do it on your own, but also lots of full service firms provide advisors using platforms like Workspace to help them sift through all that data.
Great. And Charles, just to expand on that, a question from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from data, what should wealth management firms really focus on?
Yeah, so apart from data, I think, we're in this new COVID, post-pandemic world, and it's hard for advisors and wealth firms to really connect with their clients. So all this data is out there. We talked about all the data that's available and how they can get through it, but it's creating that engagement model with that client using tools such as digital collaboration tools. So we have a platform here called Wealth Connect that allows investors and advisors and wealth firms to connect through digital means, whether it be through chat, video, voice, co-browsing, screen sharing. It allows you to really have this type of conversation we're having today. You can't do it face to face as much as you could before. You can do it through digital means, and we're providing some of the tools to allow those firms to connect with their clients and engage them. Because I think it's really hard, in a digital world, to keep and retain clients, keep them engaged with the platform. It's so easy to move from platform to platform. You want to have the reason for folks to come back to you on a regular basis. So one is definitely data, and providing the right data and insights. The other is the ability to connect with people and get answers to your questions, dynamically, and have those type of conversations we're having now through digital means. So I think it's a great thing to do, is to offer, collaboration through your platform and allow your clients to come back and have a personalized experience through a digital channel.
And I'm wondering too, we're talking about the channels here and how they communicate. Do you see a change in what companies report based on, the channels that they have now that maybe they didn't have access to years ago, and even years ago when ESG and sustainability was not really looked upon in the way that it is now? The content, what they are reporting, has that changed and shifted along with the channels that they now have?
Good. Ed, do you want to take that, or do you want me to take that?
You can go first. I'll go second.
I think they definitely, as we talked about, they definitely shifted, right? I think the content's gotten to a point where it's gotten deeper. There's more analysis on the content. So I think as people become more inquisitive, have more options for digital means to get information, the content's gotten deeper and more rich. I think there's definitely a shift in what they're reporting on. ESG is a great example, right? To Ed's point before, right? It wasn't really on the radar, 5-10 years ago. But the ability to kind of reach out and go deeper in certain research and do more things through digital means allows these firms to have to provide more content, more reporting information.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So the lights went out. It's light saving, so I apologize for that. So,
Okay.
but yeah, I would say that I agree with Charles. I think that the information that's going to be out there is going to be so tremendous and significant. But there are tools out there that would assist the investor to zoom in on what means the most to them, in particular with ESG factors. And as I mentioned before, I think they're here to stay.
Great, thank you for that. And Priya, thank you for your previous question. Faisal asked, and I hope I got that correct, Faisal, what can we realistically expect a standardized form of methodology for ESG to look like? So can we realistically expect a standardized form of methodology for ESG? So you want to take that, Ed, and then Charles, you can chime in?
So Faisal, that's a very good question, and it's one that is actually being discussed with regulators around the world. So we're seeing, for example, in the European Union, ways to standardize the information. As a matter of fact, regulators are requiring companies to disclose more on ESG. It's happening here in the States as well. We have SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is one of the frameworks that is very well respected. But we also have GRI, we have TCFD. There's so many different ways to report, but there are organizations that are getting together and trying to make sense of all of this and provide a one uniform standard for everybody to report on. I think we're years away from getting there because there's so many different views and so many different ways of doing it globally, but it's definitely going to happen down the road.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He knows this better than I think definitely it's going to take some time, but we'll definitely get to a standard format at some point down the road. We'll have to keep working on it, but I agree that we'll get there at some point.
So let's shift and talk about, the tools and experience a bit more. We've touched on the hyper personalization factor and the use of data, but let's take a step further here. What can firms do to engage better with their investors? I know we just spoke about firms using the platforms? Are there other areas that firms can use to engage? Would it be direct? Would it be using their own digital tools? I mean, how do you see that progressing over the next year or so? And Charles, we can start with you.
Sure. I'll just add to what I said before. I think, one thing firms can do better is monitoring their clients' usage, right? And understanding their preferences better. Tracking what stories they're reading on their websites, kind of better understand where their true interests really lie, right? Understand their behaviors, their preferences, what really interests them is something you nearly need to mine a little bit better. I think if you're a wealth provider, going through, doing some analysis on calls to the call center, emails, making sure you're really trying to understand their intent, not just reading the data. All these firms do surveys of their clients, and I think they get some data from understanding what their clients are interested in from surveys, but it's really reading more into the data they're providing through their usage. It's something you can really do a better job of mining and learning from.
Excellent. Understanding the intent. I love that. Go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree with Charles. I think it's sort of being more mindful of what investors and users are looking for. What are their preferences? What specifically are they looking to? What need are they looking to fulfill, especially as it relates to sustainability? So that's something that I think technology is very important, but we also have to continue to use our human factor and try to make sense of it ourselves, and engage some of the actual clients. Obviously, companies have a lot of clients, but there's certain ones you can go out and engage and ask them and speak to them directly. I think that provides a fuller picture too.
Great. So the last question for both of you, looking ahead, who is the user of the future and how do investors express their values in a digital world? So we're going beyond 2021 now. What do we see the user of the future looking like?
Edward, do you want to go first?
Okay, sure. I think the user of the future will be one that will be extremely tech savvy. We're already seeing that technology is pretty much driving all of our decisions. So it's someone, once again, that we very focused on getting their solutions through technology, someone that will actually demand companies to be more transparent, to be more open about what they're doing internally, and to actually ask them to report more on sustainability. And that's going to lead to more accountability, right? And tying into how will they express themselves, they'll express themselves through their digital currency, through their investments. And that's going to actually drive a lot of the company's decisions down the road. So I think that vendors that are positioned to create solutions that are customizable for high net worth individuals and millennials will be best positioned to have the user of the future be their client.
Yeah, I would agree. I was saying the exact same thing. The way I word it is I say, you hear the phrase a lot, digital first. That's how firms are building today. But I think it's really going to be digital only going forward. I think, some of the younger generations, millennials and Gen Zs, that are, probably not really fully invested in the market yet today, but in 5 years will be, right? They're going to be digital only. They're going to be using technology we haven't even thought of yet. So look at phones and iPads today as the primary digital channels, but it could be wearables, it could be something else. And they're going to want information very quickly. They're not going to want to read through, content and reports. They want to have something recommend to them what to do next, right? What's your next best action for that investor to do? And the platforms that'll be out there will be providing that. I think I see, firms being a little bit more insightful, using AI to provide more recommendations, and getting the information to them when they need it, using, new technology that we haven't, like I said, haven't even thought of yet. So I think it's going to be a digital only world in 5 to 10 years for us. I think some of the online platforms we use today will be fading away.
So digital only, right now we say it's digital maybe 70%, and then the future digital 100%.
I think
great. So great.
Go ahead. I'll let you.
No, please.
I was going to quickly just mention, I know that we're talking about sort of personalized solutions, and just to obviously just mention our interactive brokers, we did develop a tool called the Impact Dashboard, which we launched in October in 2020. And this goes along the theme that you mentioned about a personalized and customizable experience for our users. And it's a great tool because it allows our clients to go in and invest with their values. So they are given a set of questionnaires in which they pick what values do they care about the most, what areas would they like to avoid, and provides them with a personalized scorecard and ways to improve their score with their investments. So I just wanted to mention that as one of the solutions we have out of Interactive Brokers.
Excellent. Well, investing with your values seems to definitely be a theme that we've talked about and that we're seeing here. Today's investors are making investing personal right now. Massive transfer of wealth that you talked about, Edward, 60 trillion over the next 20 years. That's a lot. And how millennials are really focused on the S factor. The E and the G are important, but we see that with their investments and their preferences. The pandemic obviously influenced sustainability, and it really influenced how people are investing in terms of the sustainable investments that we see in the various sectors, and even regulators are noting that. Charles, you brought up the social media trends that are having a huge impact. GameStop, that is definitely reflecting the social media trends, and firms really needing to provide analytics to investors. In terms of how retail investors will get this information, they will use the sites of the firms, the reports of the firms, those annual reports, as well as just Google searches. But they're really focused on narrowing down what they value most, conducting their own due diligence on providers and seeing which ones resonate and which ones they really trust. In terms of what the future looks like, in terms of how we can make it a more digital environment, monitoring client usage, tracking preferences better, and really using analytics and behavioral data to understand what investors are looking for. Finally, investors of the future, what do they look like? They are tech savvy. They get their primary solutions from technology. They demand more transparency. They look for greater accountability, and they also want things quickly. They express themselves through investments, and a digital-only future is what we're headed for if we're not almost already there now. Thanks, Charles and Edward, for joining.
Thank you, Keesa.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers, as always, for joining. If you enjoyed today's episode and you would like to explore more, you can access a recent report, Redefining Investor Data Needs, by following the link in the comments or scanning the QR code on your screen right now. And for more information about Interactive Brokers Impact Dashboard, which is what Edward just mentioned, and sustainable investing landing pages, visit the URLs on your screen now. Thank you so much for joining, and be well.